Greetings and salutations, hello you beautiful individuals. It is another episode of flying on solo today, and I hope you enjoyed the roller coaster ride that was FlyQuest versus BLG. You've had some Pepto-Bismol to settle the stomach and everything after that, because there were ebbs and flows, ups and downs, highlights, lowlights, disappointment, excitement, pretty much every range of emotion you could get to. And at the very least, what we were delivered was a banger on the Rift. And even if things maybe didn't end, it ended with a whimper instead of a bang. At least we had some of these fantastic moments, and we should be proud of FlyQuest. But of course, we've got to get right into the standout series-altering Game 3, which coulda, shoulda, woulda been one of the, if not the greatest comeback of all time. We're talking near 10K, not near, over 10K deficits before FlyQuest got a pick on, and then another pick, and then another pick. He was straight up inting on that Nautilus. And then, of course, we have this insane Baron fight with the immaculate play out of Inspired, which we'll get deeper into as we talk more about this series. But the Poppy flash in, bops out Beishuan, and then ends up stealing the Baron. And then the desperate end for FlyQuest, them trying to close out this game, and you've got to imagine they just got way too hypey, thought this was their only chance to get back into this game. Obviously, they don't play this cleanly, and we talk about these kind of Nexus races. There's so many different things going on. It's pretty much impossible to play it perfectly. But Masu is chasing on Nautilus, kind of leaves the team behind. They seem split on killing BLG members versus fully focusing, zeroing in on the Nexus. But the more important part here, and of course, you've seen multiple people talk about this, they needed to back because they needed to spend the insane, almost, it's like a 6K influx of gold that they just got, but they pushed right from the Baron, so didn't even get to spend any of it. So it is still like they were at a sizable deficit. You feel like if the adrenaline wasn't there, if they were more calm, clear-minded, and focused, they would have got the inhib, maybe a Nexus turret at most, and really, they probably all should have followed Masu to chase on, and then they all aren't going to get ace. They can actually go back with the Baron recall, spend money, and I mean, the game's basically a reset at that point, except you have the Baron buff to maybe go and close things out. So it feels like they pumped the gas a little bit too hard to try and close out that Game 3. They force it, and then, of course, BLG takes over right from there. But maybe the impressive part is the series doesn't just end after this. Not only that, they come out angry in Game 4. You see an absolute master class from the combo of both Inspired and Busio in this Game 4. I've never seen Trundle Pillar completely nullify a Tristana like we saw in this one, as Hui for quad actually had a good start. This was his best game of the series. And then, of course, got to highlight Busio's Bard, 0, 1, and 20. Busio and Inspired in this game were absolutely insane. Like 90% kill participation for the both of them, 1 death combined, and they were just running them out around the map, confidently taking over this game for FlyQuest. And again, this is after that heartbreaking Game 3 loss where they almost make the full comeback and then only lose right at the final fight. But the fact that they bounce back in this fashion to have their most dominant win of the series by far was incredibly impressive. And you thought maybe all of a sudden all the momentum for FlyQuest maybe should have won Game 3, but BLG had to really work to win it. Dominant Game 4, should be feeling good heading into Game 5. They cooked up a little something in Fearless, obviously. Urgot, we know Whipple falls back onto a lot. The Zillion is the spiciest one on here. Also a Lucian, Leona, maybe a little bit sus, but things fall off the rails pretty much immediately on this one. Masu isn't in the bush in level 1, so the laning phase is just absolutely cooked because he has to level up E. He uses the pot, pops the cleanse. The laning phase is completely cooked from the get-go for FlyQuest bot lane. And then you have the Zillion getting solo killed to a level 4 Galio, and obviously that was the other main theme throughout this series, was just the absolute devastation that we got out of Knight in that mid lane matchup. But, I mean, after that start, it was just pure desperation you saw out of Inspired and a lot of the rest of the FlyQuest squad. I think he starts 0-6 on the Lee Sin, eventually gets a couple of kills and spams some emotes, but this really felt like, excuse me, a wild card matchup in terms of how completely destroyed FlyQuest were just running it down, getting chewed up in most of these team fights. I mean, 31 kills in 31 minutes, near 20k gold lead for BLG. A sad end to this series for how back and forth the first couple of games were, and how competitive FlyQuest was in this series. Should still be feeling good about the tournament as a whole, be feeling good about the showing that FlyQuest got. Obviously a very disappointing end in that game 5, and there's obviously, I mean, Masu, the Bush situation. Sure, it's a big misplay. It seemed like they were going to get stomped in this game either way. So there were too many things to take from game 5, but really you look back at that game 3 and you go, okay, what if FlyQuest won that match and then came back with that dominant game 4? Obviously that's a lot of question marks and too many what ifs, but it will always be a head scratcher, that game 3 moment. I want to jump back earlier in the series because Inspired this series as a whole, just absolutely fantastic. Clearly ahead of Beishuan and everyone except that game 5 where everything falls off. But already talked about the Poppy. Starts this series with a deathless, near perfect Sejuani game, incredibly aggressive, gets this Bwipo Aatrox rolling, gets the bot lane rolling. This entire tournament, I mean, the momentum already carried from the LTA season for Inspired, but absolutely proving he is the best Western player right now. And we're gonna have to start doing some videos putting this guy in. Where do you rank him all-time Western jugglers? I know Jankos has been sitting pretty on that throne for a long time, but I think Inspired is quickly climbing up those ranks in terms of being one of the best Western, not just jugglers, but players of all time, that you can start throwing him in that conversation after this series as a whole. And then, of course, the other massive mismatch in this set has to be Knight versus Quad. And this was feeling like 2019 Team Liquid versus IG at moments. In that series, it was the Shy that was still having absolute beastly individual performances, but some way, shape, or form, TL was coming away with game wins. That felt at times like this because Knight individually was having some fantastic games, and unfortunately in the wins, especially that Victor game, was an absolute... I've never seen a mid lane matchup go that one-sided. He was 4 levels higher than Quad at one point. He individually, at the end of game 2, had a 7.2k gold lead in that matchup. That's a dominant team win if you're up that gold. In an individual lane matchup, to be that far ahead is, well, disgusting is probably the only word you could use for it. And then learned from game 5 against T1 in the World Finals, and pulls out the Galio himself, does Knight, and far and away the most impactful player in that one. I think pretty quickly FlyQuest forgot that there was even a Galio ulti in that game as he took over. Obviously well deserving of the player of the series, and BLG now move on. They get their rematch against Anyone's Legend, who their third time the charm is what they're hoping for after back-to-back losses in those LPL playoffs, but felt like BLG did fully come around in that game 5. So now we're looking ahead for the next quest. What's up for FlyQuest now? Because again, we were left feeling a little sour with how EU performed at this event, despite losing in such dominant fashion that they did in game 5. I think Mark and I both kind of called for, you got to have a competitive series. You got to win a couple of games. Well, they won almost 2.5 games in this set. And this is without really cheese picks. You can talk about, okay, the Zillion and the Urgot, not exactly cheese, and of course they did not work out. But this was fairly standard across the board, and we saw FlyQuest going toe-to-toe. You now combine that with what they did against Gen G at Worlds. Again, these are losses. You don't really want to praise a team for losing, but proving that they can at the very least compete with some of these top tier teams in the LPL and the LCK. So the question going forward is now, can you raise up the LTA North, or is the LTA North going to bring down that competitive level that FlyQuest is? Because a week plus 2 weeks of scrimming against the best teams in the world, playing on stage against other international regions, immediately it's a boost. You've heard multiple players talk about that. Anytime the learning and the knowledge and the growth that you get from going to these international events, only to, again, it either goes one way. The rest of the region has to level up to try and compete with you, or you kind of fall back into your bad habits and still come away with wins because the region is a lot weaker. It was Inspired specifically that talked about, I don't know, he doesn't know how they can get any better playing in North America because they just aren't punished for the same mistakes that they would make against a BLG, against a Gen G, against an AL. You're punished and you're losing the game off of that mistake, and it's a mistake you might make over and over and over and over again in the LTA North, and it doesn't matter because the teams are not good enough to punish you. I will say, at least they have Cloud9, and multiple Fly members have talked about, Cloud9 pushed them, really made them have to test themselves and level up. So hopefully FlyQuest, or Cloud9 at the very least, can continue to be that pressure point and rivalry for Fly. And again, I stand by, if you threw Cloud9 now, that we've had a few teams eliminated, if you threw Cloud9 into this tournament, you're telling me they couldn't compete or probably be better than G2, than Koi? If Furia was taking G2 to 5 games, I feel like Cloud9 would have taken down G2 in a more dominant fashion. So we'll see when Worlds rolls around and you do get that extra seed from the LTA, hoping if Cloud9 is playing at this level, you would imagine it's them. Maybe Team Liquid levels up, maybe 100 Thieves levels up, who knows? But either way, we're going to have an opportunity to really see, is North America just a one-team region in FlyQuest? And really what they need when they go back domestically is, I think we need a bit of confidence back for Quad, because this was a rough tournament overall for him. I think that's the one kind of X you're putting on the report card for FlyQuest. I know there were some individual mistakes that we got out of Masu, but you still had the glimpses of star power that this dude has and can be the face of the AD carry role in the North American region. So really, it's just Quad was completely outmatched against Knight, as you saw in this series, and even going back to, the series against Shanks, he wasn't super great, and even in G2, I feel like Caps was outperforming him despite getting 3-0. So need to get Quad back to the LTA, so he's got some familiar faces that he can beat up on. It's like going back to the starting zone in a Souls-like to farm some souls. It's much easier now. You've leveled up. You've been scrimming against Chovy and Faker and laning against Knight. Now you go back home and all of a sudden Quid is not so intimidating to match up against. No offense to Quid, that's an MVP in his own right, but it ain't the same as matching up against some of the GOATs in the mid lane internationally. So really curious to see what this final split in the LTA looks like, and what level FlyQuest and the rest of the region are heading to that final international at the World Championship. Winners finals, the next spot of the bracket. Next on the docket is that LCK Spring Finals that we were denied. Yes, we're talking T1 and Gen G, and obviously it's a beautiful storyline to have them playing here. T1 has leveled up at this international event, obviously. We saw Gen G get pushed to the limit. They have been the classic case study of bend but do not break during this 21-game win streak. And how about the last time these two squads met was back in May 18th. I think that was week 7 of the LCK, so almost 2 months ago. And of course, Gen G are on a 21-0 win streak, so Gen G did win the series in 2-0 fashion. It was actually pretty competitive, both games. It was like a 5K comeback. where Chovy has one of his great Azir shuffles, and even game 2 was pretty close. And then after that series was when T1 proceeded to lose 3 of their last 4 series to close out the regular season, and why we were not high on them at all heading into those LCK playoffs, where of course they flipped the script and ended up absolutely pumping Hanwha Life, and they have continued to level up since then. So maybe Gen G was the breaking point where they struggled for a little while. Obviously, this is a historic rivalry now. How many times have we seen these guys match up in finals? But both of them in peak form heading into this, and still having a second life if they do end up losing is an absolute treat. And you cannot talk about this matchup of titans in terms of organizations in the LCK without mentioning the mid lane rivalry of Faker and Chovy. And again, last time these guys matched up, you would have been saying this is an easy edge you're giving over to Chovy, because Faker is not in his finest form and Chovy has been smurfing on the entire league. And when you look at the laning numbers, yes, it is still Chovy's kingdom and everyone else is just fighting as serfs for land. But we've seen since that playoff run where T1 leveled up, it was Faker kind of transitioning into more of these engaged champions where he can work in tandem with the rest of his team to get things rolling. And the team fighting that we have seen out of T1 during this more impressive win streak has been absolutely insane. And a lot of that is because of Faker. So we'll see. Obviously, both these guys, you don't have to talk about, well, what are their champion pools? Because both of them can play pretty much any champion that's meta and even some off picks. But it's more Chovy, truthfully, their last series against Anyone's Legend, pretty standard for him. And by standard, I mean actually below standard, because he was not really an X factor throughout this series. So gonna need Chovy to get back to that level that we saw within the LCK if he's gonna go against this level of international buffed up Faker, because yes, he has been quite buffed up in the last, again, going back to the Hanwha series and especially that BLG series, who, again, we're just talking about Knight being like maybe the best mid laner at this tournament, current form, and Faker puts up that performance. So he shouldn't be sweating going up against Chovy, even though he's lost so many head-to-heads against him recently. Then I'm looking right at the bottom lane. Of course, another very familiar matchup and rivalry in Gumayusi and Ruler, both of which have probably been the most dominant bot laners in terms of laning phase throughout this event. If you look at the numbers, absolutely disgusting. This champion pool, though, is a little bit different. We know Gumayusi loves to play something like the Varus that has been a high priority pick for a lot of squads. Ruler kind of not as into that Varus pick, so we'll see. Again, these single champions used to be such an impact in series where every game it's okay, are we going to first pick this? Are we going to ban it away? Are we going to have a counter pick? In Fearless, okay, you let Guma get Varus once. That's fine. We'll just adapt and have other picks that we can fall back into. But really, the last series for T1, it felt like Guma was a little bit of a passenger princess. And that's not a knock on him. That's more because everybody else on T1 were absolute menaces. So excited to see. And I feel like Guma gets a little bit of a buff. You know, T1 and Faker as a whole get that international buff. I feel like Guma, when he's matching up, not even against Gen G, just against Ruler specifically, because this guy is so often spoken about as the GOAT of LCK AD carries, and you know Guma is coming for that throne. So I feel like he gets that kind of extra level of motivation whenever he matches up against Ruler, and we get some of his best individual performances, and I'm not sure it's going to be any exception in this matchup. Obviously, again, it's the winner side, so whoever loses will play the winner of AL and BLG, as yes, we now enter the part of those international tournaments where there's only LPL and LCK teams left. But I feel like this one's playing out in a classic fashion. You have, I'm seeing the future. I'm seeing a competitive Gen G versus T1, because there's almost never a clean, dominant 3-0 between these two squads, regardless of what form they're in. But I think Gen G gets it done in the winners final. The streak moves on to 22-0. They're chilling in the finals. BLG gets a little bit of revenge. Third time is the charm. You know, there's a saying for a reason. They get it done against anyone's legend because the form Knight is in right now is absolutely insane. And we saw Elk level up a little bit, not a little bit, a lot of bit in this series against FlyQuest. So BLG gets their revenge. T1 versus BLG in the next round, and it's not more revenge for BLG because there's destiny on the horizon. T1 gets it done against BLG to get a rematch again against Gen G, and then you have the picture, the perfect storyline for viewership, the 22-0 Gen G perfection on the line, and of course, it's T1 that will be the squad to destroy it in a rematch of those winter finals to win their first MSI since 2017, guys. 8 years is the last time T1, then SKT, hoisted that midseason invitational trophy. But that's just the future I see that Riot is probably dreaming of if they are script writers. Again, for viewership, for just storyline development, that to me it seems like the most plausible way that things could play out. And of course, viewership-wise would be the absolute best. But honestly, any four of these final teams could win, and I would not be surprised. You saw AL give Gen G all that they could handle. BLG, I think, has leveled up since they're playing at a higher level than what we got out of the LPL summer playoffs. And I think what's most important for a BLG squad when they hit these international events is they're focused. They're not just rolling through, going through the motions in the LPL. Maybe we're doing a VOD review. Maybe we're not. Maybe we're going to go grab dinner instead. You know that they are locked in at an event like this, and they're hungry after back-to-back MSI finals losses. I don't think they even get back to the finals, but still they're hungry, no question. And of course, T1 is always here to prove themselves, and what better team to prove themselves against than what has always seemingly been the roadblock or hurdle for them from a domestic title over the last several years now in Gen G. So regardless of how this Final Four plays out, the scriptwriters have kind of already done the work by getting this T1 Gen G matchup, and I absolutely cannot wait to catch it on the Rift. But that is it today for League Unlocked. My name is Eric. Thank you to all you beautiful people for hanging out and supporting us as always, and you best believe we will catch you on that flippity flip.